Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll just give a second as people are coming in as a part. So for those that are joining live or those that are watching the recording, thank you for making the time to share this afternoon with us. I'm really sort of a bit chuffed and excited to have some of the stuff to get to talk today, both with Chris and Rishenda. As you can see from the title, we're here today to talk about scaling impact and how to be a change maker. Some of the sort of thinking around what we can be doing with the work that we do in whatever variety that be, to be able to improve the world around us, and thinking of that through the skills that we bring. And you'll hear today both from Rishenda, Chris and myself about some of our own experiences, and also love to hear more from you folks as part of the process too. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the lands which we're all meeting on, which for me are the Yugambeh people, and for Chris and for Rishenda are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Just want to acknowledge that we're guests living and working on this land, and we'll pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And when I look at the role that like design technology can play in terms of being able to improve the lives around for folks, I'd like to take with what forward steps we can be doing with our First Nations brothers and sisters as part of that process. So welcome everyone to Scaling Impact. I'd like to introduce people to Chris, who is the CEO of Justice Connect. And I should note just before I get started, like when I put this forward, there was like two people that I really wanted to speak at this, which were Chris and Rishenda, and they said yes within like half an hour, which meant a lot because they're both people that I love and peers of mine, and people that I deeply respect for the work that they do. So I'm excited to introduce them to you. So Chris is the CEO of Justice Connect, and I've been on record saying if I worked anywhere else, I'd probably work at Justice Connect. I think what the work they do is really important and exceptional as part of that process, and we'll no doubt hear a little bit about it today. Chris has worked for over 20 years within 4 communities around human rights issues, including people experiencing homelessness and mental health issues, and has been CEO of Justice Connect for the last number of years, one of the larger not-for-profit organisations that are seeking to make change within the access to justice space. And he's got a background as a lawyer and worked in casework, policy and leadership roles across a range of different organisations out of Melbourne, including Victoria Legal Aid and Tenants Victoria. We've also got in the room Rishenda Vermeulen, who is the founder and CEO of Integrity, which is a full-service agency that works with Australia's leading not-for-profits, a digital-first fundraising agency. I've known Rishenda for many years and always been really inspired by her work. She's a pioneer of transformational revenue growth with charities and strongly believes that growth will save more lives and create faster progress on equality and justice. So you can start to see sort of some of the 3 lines here. And I'm also proud that Rishenda is an advisory board member for Portable, which is now me. I'm Simon. I'm one of the co-founders at Portable, an organisation I've been involved with for close to 20 years now. And I really do think a lot about like why this and why do I keep doing what I do. And a lot of this actually is getting back to some of these themes that I'm hoping that we'll be able to cover off today as we go through part of that process too. So there, look, no doubt you'll sort of hear and go through parts of those things too. I've wanted to ask a question of you folks. So what we've got here is a QR code, which we know, and a Menti code, which you'll see here on to the right. I just wanted people to take a minute, because we'll come back to this later through the webinar. But to go in there, we've got one question that we're seeking to ask you folks, which is really about like what, you know, it's the question for you folks about what is one problem that you're seeking to solve. So it can be an open form part. We're hoping that we get some interesting part. There's nothing off limits, where there can be in your own professional journey, your company, separate to that, I don't mind. But it's one of the things we'll reflect on when we get through part of that process. So in terms of the format for today, I'm going to be covering off a little bit about some of my own reflections on scaling impact, which many of you would probably know is a report that Portable's put out, something that I authored. I wrote to a lot of last year, but also just reflecting on the nearly 20 years of Portable and my own professional journey and what that means, and some sort of insights from that, with really that intentionality of helping to start a conversation with others about what are the role can we play with the skill sets that we have to be able to enable change around us. And I'll sort of go into a little bit of what I mean by that. Post that, we're going to be hearing from both Rashenda and Chris about their own journeys and origin stories. Then we'll be facilitating some questions between ourselves, and then we'll be jumping back to this Menti and this idea, and also opening up with a Q&A process that we've got, through Zoom, and thank you, Rachel, from the Portable team for being able to sort of come through and assist part of that too. And yeah, we'll be out of here by 1:30. That's the plan. So I'll keep going into it. So this is the mission of Portable. Those that follow, have probably heard or seen it. It's something that we solidified probably, not certainly on day one of our journey, but one that came in when really formulating about the reason and the why of who we are. So as you can see here, our mission is to seek out areas of social need and policy failure. There's sometimes a bit of contention there. Some people like to call it opportunity and failure, but this idea is really about the change around us. And how do we make transformational change using our skill sets, which are research, design, and technology? And I'll sort of come back to this a little bit as we go through this presentation, where the thought being, these are the skills that we have. No doubt that you on the call have your own set of skills. And how do we enable this to be able to sort of grow things that are sort of beyond us? It's part there too. So my origin story, or one of them, is sort of summed up in this slide. Portable, I'm taking you back to 2012. Portable at that stage had already been running for 6 or 7 years. We originally set up as a film festival for portable devices, hence the name, as like a really big drive towards interested in how technology was changing the world around us. Andrew, my other co-founder at the time, was living in New York, where he lived for, I think, 7 years, and we operated spheres. But I was called with very close to where the portable offices are. And it was an interesting part of coming around where she had just got 6 years of funding, as happens within government. It's a very common thing. And she was coming up for the next review point to come through and to look at that part. And it was like, well, we need to be doing something around innovation and digital, because this is what we got the funding to do. So it's like, hey, we're thinking about a new website. We'd like to have a chat. And that's the caper that we were in, and we're in for many years. And I remember going to visit, meeting Kerry, and coming in, and we spoke about everything but the website. But this image, which was a part of the story she played out to me, was that she had just got her phone, an Apple iPhone, fixed in an Apple store. And she was talking about what a wonderful experience it was with being able to go to the Genius Bar and being able to be told when to come in, and how long things were going to take, and knowing every step of that process. And reflecting on her own experience for courts, it's like, if you come to my court, it hasn't really changed since the 1850s. You know, it's there between 10 and 4, because that's when the magistrate might have got their horse and cart here. We haven't really changed a lot in 170 years or 60 years at that time. And the question that she asked of me is like, how do I make my court more like an Apple store? And that's something that's sort of lit a fire for me personally, especially when over the journey of Portable, of all the things that we've done over the years, and like, why do we keep doing what we do part? It's been a very like a nourishing point to look at and go, well, yeah, how do we bring our skill sets of research, design, and technology into a sphere such as this? So for those that follow Portable and what we do, like access to justice is really core to one of the range of impact areas that we work in. We've probably done upwards of 100 projects in the last 12 years, Australia and globally. And I really sort of draw it back to this time. And even though someone like Kerry never saw herself as an innovator or potentially even as a change maker, had this really indelible effect on my own personal career, but just also that way to recast that shifting and changing, especially when we've got a lot of, I guess, entrenched services and structures. And we all recognize it's really difficult to make changes. So why try? Or if we try, do we expect something in like a few days or something? So it was just I just wanted to share that as like a bit of the process and for me, and how that sort of lent to what we sought to cover off. this sort of led us at Portable, and it came throughout, not necessarily the start. We started as a film festival for portable devices. This is pre the iPhone, but to really focus on design and really bringing in co-design. And this is a variation of the UK Design Council's Double Diamond that's been in existence now for about 20 years. Pretty common now across the way in a good way. And you see at the top, it's like how we solve the right problems and solve the problem right. And especially coming from a technical background, you know, we've been in that world where, yes, you could do 100 different things and write them out in a big, long post and do all those parts. Doesn't mean that you're going to solve the problem that people are seeking to do. So how do we actually get in front of people to go through and do that part? And design, I guess, for us has been that change agent of being close to the users and citizens and what they're seeking to do. And that idea being that, like, through that part, we can work towards the scaling that we do. This also led to what I call just generally the scales of work. So I've got on this left side, like small projects, right? Where probably a lot of us have seen it, where, you know, there could be a grant funding of a certain amount, or there's money left over at the end of a financial year. So you set up a new project because people like it. It could be, you know, co-designing something, a pilot. If you're running it in 2017, you're probably talking about social media. If you're running it in 2011, maybe it's second world. But if you're running in 2024, it's probably got something to do with Gen AI. Like, a lot of it sort of picks up on the trends that are there, and we all do follow those trends. And these small projects can work well, but so that's one part. The other part is these sort of large enterprise changes that within government and private sector, we hear them more within government because we are able to see the information that's talking to it. Really looking about very large transformational change with very large teams, embedded teams that have their own different ways of talking, different roles. And if you look at historically, most of the time don't result in that real return on investment that one was seeking. So, you know, got this little side and the bigger part. And also note on the smaller project side, I think it's good because it can engage people about an issue, but sometimes it can also set up unfair expectations of what it seeks to solve it. Like, take hackathons, not as popular as they once were, but this idea of like getting a bunch of smart people, usually unpaid, usually young in their career, to come and solve a problem in a few days. And I've always had the view is do you think that, like, on a weekend, you can solve an issue that people have spent literally tens of billions of dollars on for the last 50 years? Like, to me, it tinges a bit of arrogance as a part, but I think it can act as a really good place to be able to get people excited about these are some of the things. And if I look at like the area of portable, what I like about where we sit and what we do and what's kept me there is that I think these are some of the best problems to solve. So the challenge is, how do you sort of work between? And I'm very much of the view that you've got to create this space in the middle to play, where it can't necessarily be a small project because you'll join that zeitgeist and be asked of these things every time, versus a large enterprise world, which now in a more financially austere time, there's less of those opportunities, thankfully. I tend to think that the market's a bit, you know, it's a bit simple, like in the sense, if the government puts a tender for $100 million, you'll get a $100 million response. But there's so many more effective ways now to be able to work through that. And this idea that, like, you've got to be working in that middle to be working around that particular issue you're seeking to solve. So this is the sort of the views I've got in the scaling impact side. And I probably what denotes this scaling impact piece and what sort of underlying, and I guess what's an ongoing experiment through part of that process, is that if you solve something in one jurisdiction, how do you then take that out and solve it and then resolve that elsewhere? Like, if you've already done a lot of that thinking, how do you then scale that into other parts? With the view being, things don't end at the border. I'm currently in Queensland. Chris and Rashenda are in Melbourne. No doubt you're everywhere else. The actual needs and wants of most of us are relatively the same. However, we don't currently have an ecosystem that is encouraging of that sharing of parts. So part of this idea of this scaling impact piece is to think about how do we create and what might these ecosystems look like? Because I think that the days of these large enterprise, they're probably done, and that's a good thing. You know, the government doesn't have the money that it had 3-4 years ago, and probably won't for some time with the level of debt that it's doing. And conversely, small projects are good, and can encourage people. But I'm also wanting to know, how do we move them further along that journey? Like if I was to sort of sum up my reason for talking to this and anything, it's like, I want more people with skill sets that can solve these things to stay in this area. Because you could go down from the small project side and said, hey, I co-designed this health, this justice, this NFP solution, but they didn't do anything with it, which is common. It's a criticism I've got of a lot of like general design stuff where it's like, I gave them all the answers, they didn't do anything with it. But the point I'm trying to get at is like, I don't want to necessarily lose people that are solving problems that may not need to be solved, or problems that don't have the same impact for us as a society, being an advanced Western democracy, a wealthy democracy. How do we create more of the spaces, whether it be fixing a whole myriad of different things? The question I asked of many of you folks is sort of part of that process. So that's really that part about how to encourage these spaces to play piece, like whether it be, the different partnerships that sit into it. The other theme I want to sort of talk to is this, what I'm calling like these building of ecosystems, where especially if you're looking at like the one-off project, the challenge is that if you get the project in your service org, you do the project, you move on. And, there's challenges there in terms of being able to maintain that knowledge. This is external to government and NFPs, but there's also that idea that like, how do we get people like more centered into the areas that we're seeking? So I've sort of reflected and see this sort of three areas where, you've got the problem owner. So the person who is in charge of that problem, that could be a not-for-profit, could be a commercial organization, could be government. So for instance, I'll give an example next. The funder, so the person who's actually funding that project, that's then on that right side, and the fixer, the person who's got the skill sets or the organization, whether internal or external, to actually go about solving the problems. A lot of cases, this is all kept in one organization, and that's okay. But I think where it works most successfully is where you've actually got three different parts to it. So here's Amica. Amica is amica.gov.au. It's a project, one of the projects I'm most proud of. Been working on it at Portable now for coming on 7 years in conjunction with the partners below. And it helps people separate without the need for lawyers in Australia. It's makes its own revenue. It's internationally recognized as world leading. People separate everywhere. It's given us an opportunity to be meeting and talking around the world. But why I think something like this works and has worked for as long as it has is that it's a very clear delineation between these different parts. And there's obviously overlap, but that idea, the owner there is National Legal Aid, and within it, there's the Legal Services Commission of South Australia, who we work with. So a state entity that's part of a national body. There you've got the federal government in the Attorney General's department keen to fund it. And then you've got someone like us in the middle where, we're playing that role of like product manager in conjunction with National Legal Aid and Legal Services, CTO and developer. And, I've reflected on this and just thought these are the type of partnerships that I think it could be really interesting. And especially as there's so many myriad of issues to solve, a lot of organizations themselves probably don't have the financial resources nor the culture to be able to maintain it. And I've certainly seen that over the last number of years. This is probably pre the current financial austerity. A lot of larger orgs were trying to build their design teams and the development teams, and most of the time they fail because they're sort of an addition to an existing service that's there. So how might we, Portable or others, come in and be able to sort of help be able to provide some of these things and then can seek to scale? And why I think something like scaling is interesting here is National Legal Aid, the Attorney General, are interested in what it means for Australia. However, we at Portable could be interested in what it means everywhere, what it means outside of family law. I should note we probably get 20,000 people a year using this now. But people separate in every country. Culture may differ a little bit, but it's effectively a relatively similar process. So it's definitely been an exploration for us as an organization into what else we do. We've had pilots look to be established in Ecuador and a bunch of other countries. And it's really quite an interesting through line for work. So I just wanted to posit that as an idea for when we talk about scaling impact. How do you bring in some other people as part of that process into the work that you do? So yeah, I just wanted to share some of those top level thoughts. We'll get to sort of questions in the chat as we're coming through too. There's the report itself, which no doubt many of you either got access to or, you'll get access to at some point. But, the point I'm seeking, hopefully in part today, is how do we encourage more people to be doing stuff like this? Or look, let's critique it for what that is. But that idea there, I think, is really important. I'm now going to pass over to Rashenda to speak. So Rashenda will talk about her own journey and that of integrity. Then we'll hear from Chris, and then we'll start going into some questions and then open up. Over to you, Rashenda.
Thanks so much, Simon. I love hearing about your story and journey. And I'm also really excited to hear from everyone on the call today. I know we're going to questions at the end of our introductions, but I really deeply want to understand what social impact means to you and what questions do you have about your career or your journey. You have a great group here today that we can share our lessons, but it comes with taking that brave step and putting your questions out there. Who am I? I'm Rashenda Vermeulen, and unlike Simon, before starting an agency, I had never worked in one. I had never even worked in a business. I was a social worker, and I worked with people like this guy, Dan, who worked with people with disabilities, helping them find employment. And I was working in the US, and there in 2008, in the global financial crisis, I was working at World Vision at the time on a malaria campaign. And I was given the choice, you can either go back to Australia, because we're going to make you redundant, or that competition that you did for malaria to raise money? We're thinking maybe we could use social media at World Vision and you can do that. So there were your two options. So I thought, okay, I'll give this a crack. So this, hey, can you start this Facebook thing turned into actually growing very large online communities of thousands of people. I think it was over 1 million in the US and 500,000 in Australia. And it also meant taking online influencers and content creators all across the world to show them the impact of World Vision's work. And this experience, really showed me the power of storytelling, but also data-driven advertising to connect younger audiences to the social issues and causes. So, traditionally, not-for-profits, they still really struggle with reaching younger donors. I say younger because we're talking those under the age of 50. And a part of that challenge is because they're quite reliant on non-digital channels to generate that income, or when they are using digital channels, it's usually been to supplement more traditional forms of campaigning. But this experience at World Vision really showed me, obviously was in a unique spot being at a very large not-for-profit, but what the power of that, if you're matching story and advertising to reach younger audiences, just the possibilities that existed. So this passion, grew into what is now Integrity Agency. So 12 years later, we are a B Corp, we are a 35-person agency, and our tagline is, we help good grow. And the type of people we attract are quite varied. Some are from the not-for-profit sector, some are from traditional agencies that really they wanted to work with not-for-profits. But what combines us or connects us is that we believe in the power of data and creativity to drive results. And we do this for our clients across Australia and in the US. And helping charities grow, it looks different depending on their need. For some, it might just be creating digital-driven advertising that gets them to give to charities in new ways. For others, it's activist messages that gets them to sign petitions to increase our foreign aid funding. As far as what's our most tangible measure? To date, we've raised $45 million for charities, primarily through digital channels, 5 million alone last June. And all of those digital channels have helped them reach younger donors. So if I were to be asked, what's what's most impactful to you? It's not necessarily the amount that we've raised for not-for-profits, it's the people that are giving. It is the people that are younger and harder for not-for-profits to reach, that are starting on their journey with not-for-profits. And that is really the mission behind Integrity, is how do we help not-for-profits who we believe are so tied to creating positive social change in the world. Our role is to help them be successful. And the best way we can do that is to help them build relationships and revenue channels from younger donors. They are the experts at their work and how to create that change, but we want to help them reach new audiences so they know the impact that they are able to make.
Thanks for that introduction, Rashenda. I look forward to coming back and asking more questions of you and part two. Chris, I'm going to now pass to you to talk about your background and also what Justice Connect does, and your reflections on scaling impact.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks for the kind words at the outset. I also loved hearing from Rashenda about young people under 50. It's nice to be young. Also, I'm in kind of permanent shade here. I'm sorry about that. That's probably best for everyone anyway. It's good to be here. I'm CEO of Justice Connect, a community legal service fundamentally, and we work in a range of different ways I'm going to talk about. But perhaps following the lead from Rashenda and Simon, if I think about a turning point for me, it was when I was at the Geelong Magistrates Court, I don't know, more than a decade ago now, and I saw this guy called Jason, and he came in, he was almost mute, he wasn't speaking, he was with a caseworker, and he was on the verge of being kicked out for drug dealing in housing. And, I would be the first to say that he's probably not the sort of guy that you wanted living next door to you, given some of the behaviour that came out on the file. He was under 18, and when I looked at his file, I saw how problematic it was that he was involved in eviction proceedings. He'd been kicked out of home when he was young. He'd been raised in a family where there was a lot of violence and a lot of drugs. He developed severe mental health issues, severe drug challenges himself. He'd been offered very little support. And for me, I thought there must be a better way here. The law is a terrible tool for trying to assist this guy. And that led me to work on, to apply for and receive a Churchill Fellowship, which took me around thinking about how we can sustain tenancy, how we can keep people housed and avoid them being evicted into homelessness. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today was really, I'm fundamentally a casework lawyer. I've had a lot of experience in housing and homelessness, and mental health and disability. And then in the last few years, I've been working more in relation to management and leadership type roles. If I could think about one of the things I was interested in from very early on, it's impact. So similar to you, Simon, perhaps a different pathway, but if you work in access to justice and legal support, you are confronted on a daily basis by overwhelming need. The most recent research in relation to access to justice was Victorian research that has national significance, and it showed that about in any given year of the 6,000 people they surveyed, about 40% have a legal issue. And so on a national level, that's about 6 million people with a legal issue. And the staggering thing about that research showed about 80% of legal need goes unmet. And so, of course, I'm CEO of Justice Connect. I would be complaining about legal access to justice and legal need and so on. I think it's something that we as a community should all be very, very concerned about. Legal need is immensely significant if you're experiencing it. It can impact your family relationships, your financial stability, your housing, your health. The thing about legal need, and the research proves this, it can create disadvantage and sustain disadvantage, and disadvantage can create legal need. So what you see from the legal research is this kind of continuum. People who are experiencing disadvantage have more and more persistent legal issues, and it stops them from escaping disadvantage. So it's something that we should really be concerned about, and it really motivates us at Justice Connect. At Justice Connect, we're interested in how do we increase access to legal support and progress social justice. At its heart, we look in some ways like a traditional legal service. We've been around for many years now. We assist people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, people who are experiencing or at risk of elder abuse, people who turn up to court alone. We help not-for-profits with a whole range of different issues because community organisations, like individuals, have legal needs. And as I was saying, from the start at Justice Connect, we're interested in impact. So that's something that Justice Connect and I share, I think. And at the start, we were set up to look at how to leverage pro bono, right? And I'm going to come back to this point. And the one tool that I wanted to talk about that we've built is this pro bono portal. One of the challenges that you have when you're looking at pro bono is that it's lumpy, right? I've worked at legal aid, and if you're at legal aid, you kind of know how much capacity you have. Say you've got 500 lawyers at legal aid, you get 500 lawyers worth of access to justice. If you work in pro bono, how much access do you have? It's not quite clear. And there is research to show that there is quite a significant amount of it, but a team that has capacity this year, this month, this week in a law firm, next week might not. And one of the things, one of the other challenges, one of the other pain points about trying to work with pro bono and make it a sustainable, useful access to justice tool is the fact that you have to do it one by one. So if we're accepting individual requests for assistance, we equally have to place those requests with individual firms. And what that meant for a long time with us was somebody on the phone taking calls, maintaining a spreadsheet. And we had a very nasty looking spreadsheet. And then trying to place those and going through the list. We have 51 members. You start at the top and you end at the bottom. And what often meant was we were going to the same handful of firms all the time, and we weren't reaching all of the different capacity in the network. So Simon's put up a slide here of our pro bono portal. And really for me, there's a story about that. When I was in 2009 at Justice Connect in the homeless law team, and that was when the Black Saturday fires happened. I turned up out at Healesville just waiting for people to come to us. That's not actually how legal need presents. In the months and years that came after all the legal need, there was a lot of legal need that came out of that. But what we saw at the time was pro bono firms and lawyers wanting to help, but there was no coordination. In 2016, we did a big design piece, and I'm interested, Simon, to talk at some point about the role of Portable in research. So for us, a really important thing was understanding the problem. And you talked about this double diamond, exploring the problem and defining the problem. For us at Justice Connect, a critical moment was understanding what this pain point was. So, this idea of trying to manage all these requests for help and trying to reach further into our pro bono partnerships to deliver more help. And so our portal really, that's what that does. It's an online platform for firms to browse and select matters that we place on a bulletin board, essentially. There's a lot going on there about how we match matters with firms and how we track data and so on. This slide I'm really proud of. It shows how this portal that we have developed, we use it at Justice Connect. We've shared it with CLCs across Australia, and now it's being used around the world, whether that's in Ireland, India, New Zealand, the UK, the Philippines. There's a huge range of different ways that this tool is being used. And for me, it comes from this research piece, from understanding the problem, but also there's a lot of grit that's involved in developing something and improving it. And I might leave that there for the moment. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. It's good. And thank you, Rashenda, for giving some backdrop. And it's great to hear we've got questions starting to come through Q&A on Zoom. I'd suggest you continue to do that. There's also stuff on the menu board too, which is cool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing, and then we'll come back to this and I'll come it as a part. But I'm interested from hearing from, thank you for sharing your origin stories, folks, of what's the part. I just wanted to reflect and thinking if you were in your younger career self, and you're reflecting about what you're doing now, and you're both in terms of driven by the reasons that you're in what you do, which is no doubt probably many people on the call. What advice would you give to that person? That person the week before Geelong Court for you, Chris, and the week before Lehman Brothers for you, Rashenda, in 2008. What reflections would you have, in terms of if you looked at your work now? I'll start with you, Rashenda.
Okay. Oh, I've actually been thinking about that today because we're doing our team all in and thinking about the origin story stuff. And I think like so much of the initial years trying to do something different and create an impact is being comfortable with not knowing what the heck you're doing and doing it anyway. And I think that one of the biggest lessons looking back on it is I didn't realize how transferable my skills were to areas that I knew nothing about. So, for instance, I knew nothing about finance and operations and how to run a business, but I knew a lot about like data and advertising.
Rashenda, you're like the best person I know about that then. Wow.
But I didn't even know what a P&L was when I started. So, but I think seeing like, oh, if you're used to looking at data and advertising and figuring out what's performing and making strategic decisions based on that, that's actually quite transferable, figuring out a P&L. Or, when I was working with people with disabilities, I was going into workplaces and trying to understand how they operated and could there be a section of work that someone with a unique skill set could help them? That's not different to business development and figuring out like how do you work with another not-for-profit to help them solve a problem that they might have. So I guess like if you're thinking about doing something that feels far outside of your skill set, you might actually have more parallel skills than you realize. You just won't know until you have a crack and take that risk and jump in.
Thank you, Rashenda. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I was thinking about that because, this is my 6th year at Justice Connect, and for 5 of them, I've been doing this kind of quarterly planning process where we look at our data and try and make sense of it. And I feel like in the last 2 or 3 months, I've finally figured out how to do it. It's like, it's just like I think screwing things up, but hanging in there, I think is really important. Like I was not trained as somebody that could use quantitative data and trying to figure out what sort of dashboard and what kind of metrics we were going to look at. And, we have this strategy that talks about scale, and we didn't set what targets we wanted. And, you know, that was in good faith, right? I didn't set out to do a shit job of it. I think for me now, I'm a lot better at that stuff than I used to be, but it was only through doing it badly that I'm there. So I think having a crack is part of it. I also think people joining this type of webinar is also part of it. I remember I did a Code for Australia. Are they still around, Simon?
In elements they aren't. I mean, for those that aren't, no, it's originally an American thing, came out of the Obama years of getting developers into government to solve problems, and they've done it now for teachers in education. There's actually a justice group in the US that's doing some really good work. So I look, I definitely think the intent of it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah, I did one of their courses and, learned about Agile and Scrum. And then when I was at the Human Rights Commission, we used that in one of the research projects we were doing to actually deliver, right? So we're working in weekly cycles. I was a casework lawyer doing housing and mental health, like Scrum and Agile, but then thinking, actually, how might this look being applied to the development of a major 400-page report? And it worked really well. So I think being open and interested in what else is going on and thinking about how it might apply, I think that's helpful too.
Thank you. We're starting to get some great questions coming in, which is good. Before I get to that, I just want to, I'm just going to share our word cloud that came up earlier. I'm just going to go into, just to sort of, even just to get some high level reflections. Sorry, team, I just got to get the right. Oh. This was all working before. I'll go stop. Promise it's worth it. Cool, share, and we'll just go into present. Cool. So what have we got here? Oh, hang on, I'm just loading it up now. 40 responses, fantastic. All right. So we've got inclusion as that sort of very big there. I'm interested in like just hearing, this is from the audience, if we just give a comment into it too, what type of inclusion, or whether that's inclusion within your organization or beyond this. We've got complex organization, I think there. Short-termism, yes. Chronic stress and anxiety, yep. corp knowledge sharing, or affordable. This is great. Are there Rashenda and Chris, any reflections or questions you've got of what we're seeing from what people are putting forward?
I just was going to jump in about the inclusion bit. It was really interesting for me. I think just as somebody who is a lawyer and has worked for a long time in legal organisations, I think their mental health and well-being of lawyers is notoriously bad. And I think hanging out with lawyers, like if you go into the barristers' lift around the corner here, you'll see that people have taken a red pen and they're correcting errors in the grammar of people on notices in the lift. So it is I think it can be quite an aggressive kind of subculture and perfectionism, and that doesn't help anyone. For me, I've loved to see how, as we've started to do more of this work, we're bringing different skills and experience and different types of people into the organization. It makes it a much better place to work, I think. So that's possibly not what people were thinking when they added that there, but I think for me, changing the culture here, changing the sorts of people who work at Justice Connect, always bringing different types of skills and experience can only be a good thing.
Thank you. Rashenda, anything you wanted to draw attention to?
Now, obviously, people are working on some really important problems. But reading through this list, I think the key thing that stands out, especially thinking about overconsumption, gender inequity, inclusion, complex systems, like these chronic stress, anxiety, these are huge problems that are not going to be fixed quickly. And I think knowing that their ambitious goals are important to set yourself, I guess, an expectation of perseverance and being able to figure out how you journey alongside that. Some of the most inspiring speakers that I've seen in the social impact space, besides Simon, of course, are ones that work in climate, and they manage to find hope and energy despite, all of the ways that movement isn't growing as fast as we need it to. And that hope and energy and ways to fill their tank keeps them going. So I guess that's the one thing when I look at that bubble is like, are you ready and willing to play the perseverance game? Can you identify short-term wins, and how can you keep your tank full to be able to, keep going?
Thanks, Rashenda. And I want to add to because it's back to the even the portable story I mentioned of the courts process. Before that, like, you can look at opportunities as in there's only so many of them, and they're not necessarily going to go your way. You can the way that you look at business can be very like not many opportunities or like a world of opportunities. And for me, it was able to flip it at a point like that and go, there's so many things that need to be solved in this world, really. And I just think that, like, how do we use our skill sets of design and tech to do it? I say a lot to people I talk with. I said, if I found a better organization than what I'm in, I'd go work there and do it. I mean, ultimately, I sort of see how do we bring the skill sets that we've got to be able to enable that change, and whether it be on that double diamond process or that other part, to be able to do that. And there's work that we've done that I'm proud of. There's also work I've done. It was like, we've only really done that first piece of it. We've worked within the family violence space for 10 years and done some stuff, but really done not a lot at all. And in some ways, like, part of that is a bit like the challenge of we haven't done what I would have hoped. And I'm not saying that we're necessarily going to solve it all is a part there, but that idea to keep persisting, and that sort of North Star for me has been that part. I think what the challenge is and the opportunities, how do you create business environments around that? I mean, Rashenda and I, we both run organized companies, profit companies, but B Corps. Chris, you run an NGO. I mean, they're different, but they're not that different. I'm always very interested in some of the structures that we have in here. Like, if we're chasing these longer term, longitudinal issues, how do we create those right partnerships? Governments are part of it. NGOs are a part of it. Private sectors are part of it. How do we do that part? And I think being able to sort of communicate those things is good. And I might now actually go to a question that's got 3 votes to it. We'll get to that part. It's from Kate Patterson. Can you please talk a little about how you might approach scaling project solutions impact into new areas of a complex organization that don't yet know they have that problem? Okay. So thank you, Kate. On this, I'm wanting to know, I don't know if we can get live stuff on this, Rach. I'm wondering if that's internal facing or external. But if it's about like building, I'm happy to start, folks, if then you can add to it there. If it's about like sort of building alignment, I'm always a big fan of like being able to put it out there of what you're seeking to do the world, whether it be just within your organization or beyond, because that's something where you can find people that are also share that view or not share that view, because there's just as many people that may want to see that and others that don't. And in organizations, there are different reasons that people do different things. So I've always been a big advocate of just putting it out there. Why not? Like, there's what's there to lose? I mean, sure, internally in some orgs, there's probably potentially some challenges that you might find at times. Us being outside of an organization gives us the opportunity to do parts of it. So I think just being clear, being able to write to it, articulate it, because even if you go back to a lot of those issues, and I reflect on the stuff that we're working on, if I got hit by a bus or portable ended tomorrow, I still think there'd still be a multitude of people still working within it, because the problem itself is worth fighting for, and that part too. So it's rather than like also being in a negative headspace of like the organization's bad and fucked and it's hard to work with. It's like, well, what are the things that we could be doing with that? There's all reasons that we're in some of those things. So Kate, my suggestion would be to be creating that elevator piece that you're sitting with someone in the elevator, barbecue, or the water cooler. Sound like I'm part of an American sitcom here, but that idea of being like, what's making you interested, and then seeing what people get behind it.
I'll add to that. I was going to say sell, sell, sell. It's like when I was working at World Vision, all the innovative things we were able to do there. That wasn't like they just said, oh, here's this money, go and do innovative things and solve our future problems. It was seeing a question like this, saying, I think we can use influencers to reach new people and new audiences. But there were like 20 presentations before that. And I even had a good mentor in an organization say, you're too excited about this. Stop selling the opportunity, sell the risk of not doing it. So that was like a key change, is like, how do you both show what's possible, but also say, here's what's going to happen if you don't invest in this.
Security.
Sorry. Yeah. But I think like we really, as social change makers, we underestimate the power of sales. We see that as dirty, or we would say that as like influencing, right? Like it's so important to be, maybe we should I shouldn't call it sales, advocacy. You are advocating internally, persistently for the solution that you see will address a key problem.
Just
thank you.
Jump in on that. I think that thing about the risk. Sorry, Ever the Lawyer. I picked up a book in an op shop a while ago. Cotter, Leading Change. Notwithstanding where I bought it, it was actually quite good. Part of leading change they talk about is building pressure for change. All right. So I think selling, absolutely, but also what is the problem with status quo, and looking for opportunities and hooks in the environment, in how people are working, to point out, actually, see this is a big issue and this is why. I think the pressure for change and constantly building that, so you've got this enabling environment. I think also part of this is about power, right, and role. I want to recognize, being CEO of an organization or a founder gives you certain kind of ability to shape and drive certain things that you think are important, and different levers that you can pull depending on your role in an organization. That's going to be more or less easy, and looking for what support you can get from people who carry the culture and who have decision-making authority is obviously things to think about.
Thank you. All right, we've got another question. Issues in Australia, such as the broken child support system, would create long-term value to generations if the issues were addressed. How do you decide what's important when the data doesn't go into the details? I might start, if you don't mind, starting with this one. This is something actually very much in my worldview of the last year. I've got to know a team up PIC, who are based out of New South Wales, doing some really interesting out-of-home care work with kids under the age of 18, and we've been supporting them in trying to scale solution in this space, something that's called the Centre for Relational Care. And what was interesting is, like, through going and facilitating and attending some workshops, people were saying, we spend close to $1 million, we can spend a high amount of money in terms of being able to keep kids in the out-of-home space, that, if we just invested them into a property portfolio. This is in Sydney, think about what return we'd be getting. It's like, if I look at problems, it's like, gosh, that's certainly one that's worth solving. And I think the comment there, when the data doesn't go into the details, whether that be through freedom of information or not knowing, I think it's like being able to, or the other challenge in this space is you're dealing a lot of kids under 18 in terms of them being able to talk publicly in state systems. It's a very complicated, well, I think we recognize it's a very complex issue, but one that's probably worth as much as we can to get it right. My advice would be, what's important when the data doesn't go into the details? It's like back to the point that Rashenda was making before about that internal part. Like, well, what is the art? Like, what is the cell to solve this? Why is it needed? I'm even reflecting Rashenda and some of the work that Integrity does for that part too, whether it fit into the way that we'd speak of that narrative. I sort of think it's like we could make a change in this using tools is one that's worthwhile. So if anyone else wanted to add further to that.
Do you remember a few years ago they did, the Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal does kind of small claims and housing and building and a bunch of things, but they employed someone to do a mapping exercise about all the different problems. And I remember they had this big experiential room that you could walk in, and they had decision makers and so on, but they also had the wall where they'd map the problem. The number of problems in the VCAT system was unbelievable. It was overwhelming. But then they went through this rationalization exercise of picking, actually, I think it was the application process maybe that they wanted to solve. And I think they didn't end up getting there. It was all kind of funding related. But I think the child support system is one of those kind of hairy problems that Simon was talking about at the outset that many, many people, very, very smart people, have been thinking about for a long time. How do you break it down into something that you've got the best shot of tackling? Is something I'm thinking about.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like a big bundle where there's lots of issues of mental health, kids in care, access to justice, education, all the parts. And like back to that double diamond, thinking about where you start, because that's the other part, batting that size of project, like trying to solve that. That's one of those ones that they've spent a lot of money, afraid of getting on the front page of the Herald Sun or Daily Telegraph for. Like, how do you design those projects that would lead further up? Happy to talk more and share some of that work for Centre for Relational Care if anyone's specifically into it. So we've got one question, which I think might be our final one, folks. It's from Viv. Hugh, thank you for this. What are the ways in which you find ways to persevere and keep your own tank full? What a great question, Viv. Chris, I'll pass to you to get us started.
Simon, you and I have talked about this a lot. Simon and
you and I have, yes. I know the answer, but
from month to month. Yeah, for me, meditation is really important, and I can feel everyone eye rolling right now. But I think, one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is this thing about inner critic, and, particularly when you're in a leadership role and you're doing stuff that doesn't work, how can you go again? I think meditation for me is about a way of lowering the voice of the inner critic and being okay with screwing things up and so on. It's been a really important part of my whole life, but it's also so that you can leave work at work, and when you're present with your family, you can actually be present. And I also think, particularly in leadership, people need you to have a certain level of energy. I remember I was getting coaching once, and they talked about the death spiral. Oh, Chris, you don't want to be in the death spiral. When you're feeling grim, and we've all been there. I remember when we did our CRM, it was like one of those projects that was so big. I just wanted to get off at one point. I just you just couldn't get off.
A tech project that didn't go to plan. Who would have thought?
Oh yeah, God, who knew? I think if you can find time to focus on your breathing, even 10 seconds, it will make a big difference.
Thank you. Rashenda, what do you do to keep your tank full?
Oh, I remember when I was working at World Vision in the US, and I had this guy, Bwali Amelu. He was one of my mentors, and this guy has been through so much stuff. Like, he was in the Rwandan genocide doing response. He led a movement to help children access antiretrovirals during the AIDS pandemic. And he was like the happiest guy I'd ever met. He was just joyfully bouncing off the walls, and he'd done the hardest work that I've ever heard of. And I asked him this question, and he just said, you do what you can do at work and accept that what you're doing is enough, and have a really fun life outside of work and don't bring that seriousness from work into your home life. And I think that was something I really needed to hear as quite a serious social worker then, thinking like, oh, I should be thinking and learning about social problems and issues all the time. But, hearing that was so helpful. So for me, it's, really investing in my marriage with my husband, spending time with my kids, doing exercise that I love, hanging out with friends that are fun and that don't need me to be their social worker. I'm just really like pressing into like people, adventure and fun that can counterbalance the seriousness of work. And on the other side of that is like just working with people that are playing that perseverance game with you. That's been my retention factor. Like in the last few years, I've given away 25% of our company's equity to people that have been on this journey with me. And I always say that wasn't hard. That was my retention strategy to keep me in the company, because there's only so much you can do by yourself. So if you have people that care about what you do, walking that with you, everything seems more possible.
Thanks, Rashenda and Chris. It was inspiring for me to hear. Thank you. Viv, my way of keeping to persevere my own tank full. I go back and I just look. I've had a lot of time, Viv, to reflect on my own mortality. If you read it, I don't hide it. I've had 4 brain surgeries, 3 spinal surgeries. And many times of like, is this the end, not for work, but life, and reflecting what would I do with the remaining time that I have left on this earth. I think it's the problems that are worth solving for and feeling that I'm making enough of a change, I guess. I don't think it's necessarily feeling like it's like being in a part where like nothing gets better and we're not being able to make that work. I think that was the case, we'd sort of get out of the way. But that idea being that like, I'm of the view that like we're very blessed and lucky. There's many ways that one can make a living and run a business and do those parts. But for me, that's quite an important part. And purpose for me is quite a thing that's probably kept me engaged and going. And I just need a little win. Like, it's funny. I say to the team, it's like, I just need like one meeting with someone that matters to me. And that can keep me going for like 3 months, So like finding those like one meetings that the world could just be horrible for like a month, but you get that one thing and you think, oh, that's moving it forward in a way that I think is worthwhile. I don't need many of them, but I need them to nourish. And then so I generate them. I create those opportunities. I think those things there, and remembering the wins is a really important part of those changes that are there, whether it be getting people that are driving those parts and so forth, or those things I think would be too. We've got Katie. Oh, sorry.
About the running, Simon. What about that?
Oh yeah. Did I tell you I ran 18Ks this morning? Of course I did. Because
by the way,
a runner, you're going to ask it, but I did. I ran. Hey, I'm in your hometown too, Rashenda. I ran up to the Spit. It was beautiful. And look, I reflected the whole time. Like,
nice place to run.
Very nice place to run. So and like Chris, I have a meditation practice. Not as Chris is like, the retreats were amazing. I'm a 10-minute a day person, but I've maintained it now for nearly 2 years, and it just helps take the edge off stuff. I've definitely found that being good, and everyone has their own sort of process and part to do that too. We've got one question for you, Katie, and I'm happy to take this one offline and maybe even, what it might do, might even just help answer this with some of the notes that we end up to, Rach, which is technology-enabled impact at scale possible without trade-offs in terms of exits, ethics, expectations. I definitely think it is, Katie. That's the future that I hope for. And I think if I reflect on what Portable's done to be the business of the size we are, the change, I do think that we're finding that part. And that question's also, Rashenda being on our advisory, is sort of like one of the questions that we seek to ask. So what I'm going to do, Katie, I'm going to take that question offline and write to that and share that with everyone as a part of that process too.
No trade-offs.
The trade-offs and what they are, because you have some, but I don't know if they need to be all the ones that are there too.
Working really fast with small budgets, that's the trade-off. I think.
Yeah.
But some might not think it's that.
And also, I think, on that, I also think that the technology that's coming around the world with us is really exciting, and I think it's easier than ever to do that. So, but I will take that part to answer that better. So team, thank you for your time. Here are my details. Hopefully they're going to load. Please get in touch. Always happy to chat about this. This is something that's very close to my heart, and that with Chris and Rashenda. I just want to thank Chris and Rashenda, my peers that I value very highly, for sharing this hour with me, and for the people that have joined. I hope you got something out of it. Please keep in touch. And yeah, we'll look forward to continuing to talk and share what we find. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rashenda.
Thank you.